Okay, this is the USA for American Democracy first ever group Zoom meeting. And we asked Dr. Ido Baum to give us a little update of what's happening in Israel, the recent legislation, Mitveh Anasi, the president's compromise, and the disruption day. So what's going on, Ido?
Okay, so I'm not sure that everyone knows how the legislative process in Israel works. So the way I plan to talk about this is give you a brief explanation of 1 or 2 minutes on how legislation is passed in Israel. It's important because it would give you an idea of how fast and accelerated the process can be from the point that we are in now. And then I'm going to go one by one over the main proposals that comprise this democratic backslide or coup or reforms, as they are referred to by their promoters, and say something about additional legislation that's going on over within the Knesset, and then finally I'll try to say something about how you should view this legislation and what's going to probably happen in the next couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. So let's dive into this. Let's start with the legislative process in Israel. You probably know that Israel does not have a constitution. Israel does have basic laws that have a constitutional standing. So that means that the Israeli Supreme Court can strike down regular laws that do not comply with the basic laws or try to infringe on the constitutional structure of Israel or human rights that are protected by Israeli basic laws. But you probably also know that the basic laws do not cover all human and civil rights in Israel. There are some laws that are not protected constitutionally by the basic laws, but they are sometimes protected by the Israeli Supreme Court. These include most notably equality and freedom of the press, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Freedom
I think there's a problem with the mic.
Freedom, yeah.
We hear him okay.
Okay, and freedom of religion and freedom from religion. Okay, so what's going on at the moment is that the promoters of this reform are pushing through a series of laws. Some of them are basic laws, and some of them are regular laws that are going to change the constitutional structure of Israel as a whole. Now, any law, including basic law, needs only 3 rounds of voting in the Knesset in order to pass and be confirmed as a law. And there is no need for special majority or supermajority for basic laws. So the constitutional structure of Israel could actually be changed by a vote of 2 to 1, a majority of 2 to 1 in the Knesset. That's also a possibility. The way that the voting rounds work is that the law is brought to the first round of voting. After it is confirmed in the first round, it goes to a committee in the Knesset that deliberates and sometimes changes the law. It could even replace the law entirely, which is what the president tried to suggest yesterday in his proposed compromise. And when the committee finishes to work on the law, it sends it back to the Knesset for voting rounds 2 and 3. In voting round 2, the Knesset members vote on each section of the law, and in voting round 3, which is the final voting round, the members of the Knesset vote on the law in its entirety. But you should know that voting rounds 2 and 3 usually happen on the same day. So once a law passed the first round and is now in the committee, it is totally in the control of the coalition. So the coalition controls the speed of the legislation. And in fact, it could actually push the law through to rounds 2 and 3 and a final confirmation within something like 48 hours. So when I tell you now about laws that have passed voting round 1, these laws are an inch from being confirmed by the Knesset. One more issue about the legislative process. You will note that normally when the government promotes legislation, it does so from the Ministry of Justice. So there are professionals, lawyers that look at the laws, voice their opinion. There is an internal governmental process of checks and balances before the law is put forward by the government. When a law is put forward by a single member, an individual member of the Knesset, this is called a private bill. And private bill requires an additional voting round. It's called the preliminary round. Normally, private bills come from the opposition, and in 90% of the cases, they never pass the preliminary round. However, in this case, obviously, because the government and the coalition have no interest in going through the governmental checks and balance and process, most of the legislation has been proposed as individual private bills or as a specific bill of the Judiciary Committee in the Knesset that's headed by Simcha Rotman, one of the architects of this judicial coup. And so some of these laws had to pass preliminary voting. If they passed the preliminary voting round, that means that the coalition supports the law, and so it's very likely to move forward really fast. So let's give you a status update on the laws that are being promoted and where they are. Most importantly, the law that's going to overhaul the judicial system, the law that talks about how the Judicial Appointment Committee will be structured. This law basically says that it will be there will be a majority of politicians from the coalition. Actually 6 politicians, 5 from the coalition, will be in this committee, and a majority of 5 out of the 9 members of the committee will be enough to appoint any judge, including a judge to the Supreme Court. Actually, they can also sit just in 5. There's no minimal quorum. So and they could also dismiss a judge in a majority of 5. This law has passed the first hearing and is now in the committee, so it could be pushed through very fast. Basically, it's the law that says that the coalition takes over the appointment of judges in Israel. Judicial review of basic laws. Can the Supreme Court strike down a basic law? I should note that the Supreme Court in Israel has never struck down a basic law in Israel so far, but this is a concern of the coalition because the coalition is concerned that some of its reforms that are done in basic laws or amendments to basic laws will be struck down by the court. So a ban on the ability of the Supreme Court to hold basic laws unconstitutional has been pushed through. It passed the first voting round, so it's in the committee, an inch from being confirmed. Judicial review of regular laws. The proposal says that basically the Supreme Court will only be able to strike down regular laws in case if there is a supermajority of 80% of the judges from the Supreme Court in its entirety, so that it takes 12 out of 15 judges to agree on striking down the law. It's very unlikely that such a thing would happen with the current composition and definitely in the future foreseen composition of the Supreme Court. This has passed preliminary hearing, not the first hearing. The override clause. This means that in the unlikely event that the Supreme Court will actually strike down a law, the Knesset will have the power to reinstate the law that's contradicting human rights and other fundamental components of Israeli democracy. The Knesset will be able to reinstate it with a simple majority of 61 that every coalition has. This has passed first round, so it's an inch from being legislated. Other proposals, making it very difficult to remove the prime minister from office. That's legislation promoted by some members of the Knesset in order to protect Benjamin Netanyahu from being removed from office for actually breaching the law or breaching the promise not to deal with the judicial coup. This has passed first vote, so it's an inch from being legislated. It basically shifts the power to remove the prime minister from office to his own cabinet, and with a super majority of the ministers in the cabinet, and only for medical reasons or for very severe criminal offenses. Ministerial appointments. This is the so-called Aryaderi Law, a law that says that the Supreme Court will not be able to review appointments of ministers to the government. This has passed preliminary vote, so it has coalition support, but it's not immediate in terms of legislation. And what you also have is a law that says that unit in the state prosecution that is in charge of investigating police officers will be transferred and will now be under the direct authority of the Minister of Justice, and which will also have the authority to investigate not just police officers, but also prosecutors in the state attorney's office. So this will be basically a political investigations unit at the behest of the Minister of Justice to investigate police officers and state prosecutors. This has passed a preliminary vote. There are other, and one more important thing, we're kind of forgetting it, but this is a law that already passed, a change to the police ordinance that gives the Minister of Internal Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the authority to give policy guidelines directly to the police. Now, this law has passed at the outset of the government, and it has been challenged in a petition to the Supreme Court. It lies on the table of the Supreme Court at the moment. Today, actually, as we speak, the Israeli Attorney General filed her position on the changes in the law, and she made a point of noting that, in her opinion, Minister Ben-Gvir is abusing his authority to give general guidelines, and under the guise of giving policy guidelines, he's actually giving concrete guidelines to police officers, including, for example, taking a harsh stand against demonstrators and protesters in demonstration against the judicial reform. So this would actually be one of the first tests to the Israeli Supreme Court with regard to the legislation. There are other examples of laws that are being pushed through, and with all this reform going on, some of them are, we're kind of missing some of them. One is the issue of the standard of reasonableness. The Supreme Court uses occasionally, not very often, the standard of reasonableness to review executive branch decision. This is very common, not only in Israel, all over the world. There is a proposal, a bill that has not passed yet, not even the initial stages, to basically cancel, abolish the standard of reasonableness on any government decision or any government branch decision. Another proposal that is still in its infancy is the proposal that legal counsel in the ministries, including the Attorney General of Israel, will be political appointments and that their legal opinions will no longer be binding. I actually think that this is one of the most dangerous proposals of all, because the Attorney General and the legal counsel in Israel are the first line of defense against corruption. Israel is a very weak democracy in terms of checks and balances, and the Attorney General and the legal advisors are basically the gatekeepers, the watchdogs against corruption. And the idea is to turn them into very compliant watchdogs. There's also the proposal to cancel the seniority in the Supreme Court for the appointment of the Chief Justice, so that the Minister of Justice, Yariv Levin, will be able to decide on his own who will be the next Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Other proposals that are being pushed forward, to give you an example, is allowing political donations to ministers and public officials in order to support medical services or costs of trial for them or their family members. We call this the bribery law because otherwise political contributions are banned in Israel, or actually the amounts are very small and certainly not for this purpose. This law does not have any checks and balances, no transparency, nothing of that sort, and it's being discussed at the moment. It was discussed this week in the Knesset. It's being pushed forward. A law that will protect IDF soldiers from any indictment regarding their activities in the territories. Now, this might sound like a good idea. The problem is that the fact that Israel conducts its own investigation protects officers in the military from the ICC, from international tribunals, because Israel can argue that it has an independent internal process of investigating and adjudicating crimes. The Attorney General warned against this law, but it's being pushed through anyway. Abolishing the right to strike, canceling the Israeli Broadcasting Corporation, and enlarging the authority of the Israeli rabbinical courts to adjudicate civil disputes, which is a very problematic law because it actually may bring a lot of women in civil cases to the rabbinical courts, and they adjudicate the cases, they resolve the cases according to Jewish law as interpreted by Orthodox rabbis, which in most cases would be harmful for the women before the court. All in all, I should say, and I'm moving to my last three concluding points. I don't think people are aware of that, but there are about 150 bills over the last 3.5 months that are being pushed through by the Israeli government and coalition. This is a record number. It never happened in the history of Israel. And this is why, even if you agree with 1 or 2 or 3 of these laws, what you should look at is the forest and not the trees. Or you could imagine, you look at the sky now, and I don't know where you are in the States, but imagine you're in New York and you see a barrage, it's a sci-fi movie, and you see a barrage of meteorites coming at you, 150 meteorites, and you're kind of looking at one of them and saying, oh, I'm in New Jersey and this is going to hit Brooklyn, it's far away, I'm not concerned. Well, there are 150 more coming at you. So this is a really unusual large attack on the democratic structure of Israel as we know it. What will be the next steps? Yesterday, the president of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog, presented his proposal for a compromise. I personally think that it was a very problematic proposal in terms of democracy. He proposed at least 3 parts of his proposition were actually taking Israel away from democracy. He agreed that the Supreme Court will not review basic laws. He agreed for the requirement of a supermajority in order to strike down regular laws. This is highly irregular. This doesn't happen in other countries. He actually agreed that government decisions taken in the government plenum that concern policy issues will not be subject to judicial review by the Israeli Supreme Court. This is a huge opening. Any minister that wants to pass a problematic policy will bring it to the government and therefore immunize it from judicial scrutiny. This is almost unheard of. He agreed to all of this. But I think 5 minutes after the president gave his speech at 8 in the evening on Israeli primetime TV and proposed his proposed compromise that he's been working on for weeks, it was outright rejected by the coalition. And I think the reason for that is that the president tried to keep the Israeli judiciary independent, and his proposal was that the judges will be politically appointed, but not entirely controlled by the coalition. He suggested moving away from the situation at the moment where the judges have a veto right in the appointment, or a veto opportunity in the appointment of judges. He waived that, but he did not give the coalition strict power over appointments, and the fact that his proposal was outright rejected, even in an insulting way, actually shows you what the coalition really wants in terms of this proposal. So what's happening going forward? I think the proposal of the president was probably the last chance for internally slowing down or stopping this process. So I think what we will see is an accelerated process of moving forward with the legislation. I think the legislation will move forward strategically. For example, I think the first law that will be passed will be the law that says that the Supreme Court cannot strike down basic laws for being unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court will not strike down that law, then the government will be able to pass through with any legislation that it wants. It's an interesting question whether the Supreme Court of Israel will strike down this specific law. As I told you earlier, the Supreme Court has no history of striking down basic laws for being unconstitutional. It will be a precedent. We are in an unprecedented historical moment in Israel's democratic, political, and social development. I think this is a huge moment in terms of Israel, and I think nothing from within is going to stop this. Protests are effective, but I don't think they're going to stop the coalition from pushing through this legislation. What will happen if the Supreme Court strikes down or does not strike down any of these laws is hard to say. The president in his speech alluded to civil unrest that may come out of that. I'll try not to make projections. I'll tell you what I think might be very helpful in trying to stop this, or at least slow down the process. One is economic pressure, probably from outside. I'm a head of a research institute, the Brandeis Institute for Society, Economy, and Democracy, and I have a team of researchers from Hungary and Poland that have been looking at the reforms there and comparing them to Israel. And what we've found is that economic pressure seems to be a matter of concern to governments there and in Israel as well. The second thing, probably even more effective, would be diplomatic pressure. I think it's not a coincidence that Netanyahu has visited France, Italy, he's now in Germany, and going to London, and he's been sending emissaries to the States and to Washington. He's not going there himself, probably because he's a persona and not so much grata there at the moment. But it gives you an idea of the concern. Israel's existence definitely depends over the long term on its support from its diplomatic allies. And if this support wanes, this would be a problem from Israel, both economically and diplomatically in Israel's region. So I think the pressure in terms of diplomacy, in terms of governments, probably not from Europe, because Europe has been saying politely that they're watching this, they're watching the democratic backslide, but they're not doing a lot. So probably the United States would have a larger impact on this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have time for just a couple of questions. If anyone want to ask a question, Ido has to go for another meeting.
I just want to say thank you, because I'm speaking later to the group at a synagogue in the United States, and you gave me a lot of great material, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Speaking of great materials, we are going to discuss next a document that one of the team members put together. I put a link in the WhatsApp group and in the Zoom call. If nobody has any more questions for Ido, we're going to say thank you. We're going to stop recording. 3.
סליחה, אני שאלתי, כתבתי את השאלה הזרונית.
Yeah, there were questions in the comments. I couldn't read them while I was talking.
Yeah, it's Ronit from hi. And what I wanted to ask, because I believe that if you go to a full strike, then the government cannot function. And why it's not happening?
It might happen. So far, the most powerful entity in producing a full strike in Israel is the Histadrut, the major labor organization in Israel, and they've been on the fence because they also need support from the government on various issues that have to do with labor rights in Israel. I think if indeed the presidential compromise falls, the Histadrut may join, and then we will be seeing major strikes. To tell you that it will actually have an effect, 1 or 2 days of strike is something that the Israeli economy can stomach. A long-term strike, if this is the direction that we're going, that may have an effect. But so far, we're not there. We're not. This is not happening so far.
Hi, this is Liat Shrift. I'm from Philadelphia. We're trying in the U.S. to understand what it is that we can do from where we stand to support. So we're putting together demonstrations. Our demonstrations are getting maybe 5 to 10 seconds each on some collage of all of the cities of the world. Is there anything that we can do from our unique standpoint in the U.S., our unique standpoints in specific cities? What is it that we can do to help? Because I don't know that our 10 seconds that each city gets where we say the city name and show some flags, if that's really making a difference.
First of all, I think it does make a difference. I think the fact that this is unusual. I think if you'd asked me half a year ago if Israeli civil society and Israelis and Jews all over the world are going to rise to protect Israeli democracy like this, I would be very skeptical. I think a lot of people in Israel are encouraged by the fact that this is happening in Israel, that these protests are going on and on for more than 10 weeks now. This weekend will be the 11th week of protests, and they're really encouraged by the support that's being given from other countries, even if it's only 10 seconds in the news. Forget the news, because the media has a lot of attention from Netanyahu and his supporters, and may not report on this. This gets a lot of coverage in the social networks, and people hear about this. So this is very important, number one. But I think if there are ways, and I'm not an expert on this, I guess Oz and people that are organizing this group know better than me what to do. But if there are ways to get to the government, I think the Biden administration is really concerned. I can tell you that they've met with me. The embassy, the U.S. embassy, asked to meet with me and a lot of other people, not just me, over the last 2 months to understand what's going in Israel. And I felt that they were concerned. I think the Biden administration is concerned over democratic backslides in many countries that the U.S. has relationships with, and Israel is very unique to the U.S., so they should be very concerned about this. And I think pressure from people in the United States on the government would have a significant impact, and very important to what is going on here in Israel.
Thank you very much, Ido. I'm just going to tell people on the comments, people talked about writing to your representatives. We have on the website, www.USA4israelidemocracy.org, some templates if you want to write to your representative and a few other things. And with that, thank you, Ido.